and welcome to the session. In this video we'll discuss about classical and adaptive machine learning system, and we'll also see different types of learning. See, classical machine learning systems, they basically have an input, it has a process, and it has an output. The input here, it takes the values from the environment directly. The inputs are processed and a hypothesis is generated as a output model. So that means the hypothesis which our machine learning, the learning algorithm is generating is nothing but our output model. This model is used for making the predictions. Whereas in an adaptive machine learning system, it interacts, it has an input, it also has an extra feedback, and it has an output. So here the system interacts with the inputs for getting the labeled data. Direct inputs are not available. A best example of adaptive system is reinforcement learning, where a learning agent interacts with the environment and in return he gets a feedback. So based on this feedback, the agent, the learning agent, will generate input samples for learning. So based on the feedback, the inputs are generated for learning, which is used for generating the learning model. So these learning agents are not static, they are adaptive. They change their behavior according to the external signal which is received from the environment. So this feedback, we call it as a reward. So basically learning is the ability of the learning agent adapting to the environment based upon the reward. So that's the typical difference between classical and adaptive machine learning system. Now coming to the learning types, there are different types of learning. The first one is learning by memorization, or we also call as rote learning, where memorization is done without understanding the logic or concept. So basically the learning here is by repetition. And also the learning can happen by comparing with the existing knowledge of the same input data and producing the output if present. So this is called as learning by memorization or rote learning. The second type of learning is learning by examples or learning by experience. So we try to find an analogy, or we perform an inductive learning from the observations and then formulate a general concept. So the learner here learns by inferring general rule from the set of observations or examples. So basically this is the learning by examples or analogy. So a rule is made based upon these examples or set of observations, and hence it is also called as discovery learning. The third one is learning by being taught. Like this YouTube channel is an example of passive learning because it is being taught by an expert or a teacher. But suppose the learning was interactive, right? So if the learner is interacting with the teacher, right, to label the unlabeled data, then it becomes active learning. Now the fourth one is learn by critical thinking or deductive learning, where you deduce new facts or conclusion from related known facts and information, right? And the fifth one is self-learning or reinforcement learning. So where you learn from mistakes, you learn from punishments or rewards, just like what we saw in adaptive learning before, right? Depending upon the feedback, right? The feedback can be a reward or it can be a punishment, depending upon how the learning was done. So based upon that experience, new inputs will be generated to improve the learning. So that is self-learning. So a child learning a bicycle is an example of reinforcement learning. So when he is learning, he may fall. So that can be a reward, and he will realize, why did I fall? And then he will try to improve. So when he goes on learning, when he learns very well, that will become a reward. So the example of a child learning a cycle is an example of reinforcement learning, where learning is done through mistakes, by punishments or rewards. The sixth one is learning to solve problems, right? So basically this is a type of cognitive learning where the learning happens in the mind and possibly by devising a methodology to achieve a goal. So the learner here is initially not aware of solutions, right, to achieve the goal, but he only knows the goal. So when you start learning in the sixth method here, we do not know, right, how the solution can be achieved, but we know the goal. So here learning happens directly from the initial state by following the steps to achieve that goal, or indirectly by inferring the behavior. So it's like a goal oriented learning where the learning happens in mind. So it's a type of cognitive learning. The last type of learning, that is learning by generalizing the explanations or explanation based learning, right? It's also called as EBL, explanation based learning, where you exploit domain knowledge of the experts to improve the accuracy of learned concepts, right? So here you try to learn by using the domain knowledge of the experts, and using their knowledge you improve the accuracy of learned concepts. So a very good example of this is again supervised learning, where you use the knowledge of experts to label your data, right? So that is also an example of EBL, or learning by generalized explanations or explanation based learning. So these are the 7 different types of learning. Quickly just revise: learning by memorization, examples by being taught, and you have critical thinking learning, self-learning or reinforcement learning, learning to solve problems, and EBL. So that's it for today's session. Today's session we saw different types of classical versus adaptive, and we saw different types of learning. In the next session we will see another type of very important concept of learning, that is what is computation learning theory. So please watch the next video to learn about that is computation learning theory. So thank you so much, and let's meet in the next session.